Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Mondays with Michele video. This week, we're taking our picture skills to the next level, cropping to shape, removing the background, rotating, layering, and grouping images. Let's get started. And I'll make the screen bigger so you can see what's going on. So here's the picture that I showed you last week of my dad in his Cub Scout uniform. And I showed you how I cropped the picture to remove the borders that were showing on three sides of the picture. So you can trim away the parts that you don't want. So what we're going to do today is get fancy and learn how to crop that picture to a shape, like what I've done here in the right-hand cell. So let's look at how we do that. Let's just scroll down. So if I click on the picture of my father, go up to picture format, and instead of, when I click on this crop drop down, instead of clicking on crop, I'm going to click on crop to shape. And you notice there's a whole list of different shapes that I can select. So I'm going to select, let's get really strange here. I'm going to select this up arrow. And look at what happens. Dad's picture is cropped in the shape of an arrow. I could go in and select something like that shape. I could select, I like doing this one. It can make for some interesting placements. You can get really crazy. I could crop like that. The trouble is, some shapes may not fit your picture very well. That wouldn't be a good one to use because I've kind of chopped off part of his head. But you can see that there are a lot of different options. So I used the diamond shape in this particular layout to group these three photos, and I put just like a little caption, family is everything, in the middle. And I just did that as a text box and positioned it. So think of using this as an alternative to that typical scrapbook page layout. So instead of having all your pictures as rectangles in your table cells, you can actually do what I call a freeform layout, crop your pictures to a shape, and assemble them any way you want, kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. So let's see how we would create this type of layout. So what I'm going to do is go back to one of these cropped pictures, and let's crop Dad in a diamond shape. So I'm going to choose, whoops, not that one. I'm going to choose the diamond here. So I've got Dad cropped in a diamond shape. And I'm going to copy him. And I've got a blank page all set up to test this layout. So I'm going to paste him on the page. Now, you notice if I try and click on him and drag that picture around, it's not going anywhere. And that's because of the text wrap options that default whenever you paste in a new picture. So if I click on this little symbol on the right here, you can see that right now it's set to have that picture in line with the text, meaning I can't move it freely on the page. What I really want to do is have the picture move with the text as a block, but I want to be able to position it anywhere on the page. So I click on this symbol at the bottom right. And now I can drag the picture around anywhere on the page. But if I add text above it and I press enter, do you see how the picture does move down, which is what I want. I still want it to be able to move as a block if I add new text above, but I want the freedom to position it on that page wherever I want. So here's my picture of Dad. I've set it so that it can move freely. I'm going to copy and paste this some more times, and I'm going to position it and stack it kind of like puzzle pieces. And now I'm going to paste another one. And I could do whatever layout I wanted. I could do something like this and just have fun with it. So I've now created a layout of pictures that are not just that standard square or rectangle shape. But obviously, I don't want to do just 5 copies of the same picture. I want to actually have different pictures. I find it's faster to copy and paste the same picture and set up my layout like this. Then Word has a way of going in and switching out that picture, but retaining the formatting. So for example, if I want this picture to be something different, I go to Picture Format. I go all the way over to the left here where it says Change Picture, and it gives me the option to locate that new picture. Now I have the new picture on my computer, so I would click from a file, and I would go into my list of pictures, and I think I'll choose this picture of my mother. And look at that. It has switched out the picture of my father, brought in the one of my mother, automatically cropped it to that same shape because it knows I'm trying to put that picture in the same spot. I can do the same thing with this next one. So I think I'll put this picture of her. And I'll switch out this one. Let's try Dad in his Seaforth Highlanders uniform. And let's do this one here. Okay. Now, one thing you will notice when you are cropping pictures to a shape, you don't get those black crop handles. So there's no way you can kind of recenter or adjust how that picture is cropped. So what I find sometimes is I might do some cropping of the picture or setting up of the picture before I actually crop to shape, because otherwise, for example, this picture of my father in his kilt, the way this shape crops it, it chops off just a little bit of the corner of his head where his hat is. So generally, when you are cropping to shape, whatever you want to highlight should be in the center of the image. You probably want to have a certain amount of background above, below, and on each side of your center image, so that when you try to lay that shape on top of your picture, you don't chop off key body parts, but you will soon figure out which of your pictures suit that shape. So we now have a really interesting looking layout of a variety of pictures. And if I wanted to, I could add a text box and put a caption in one of these white triangles in between the pictures. So let's take a look at what else we can do. I did a diamond layout, just like I showed you. I had the pictures so that they were just about touching, and I added frames to them. Now, I showed you last week how to add frames to your pictures, and that's all these shapes. But do you notice, as I hover over these images, it's no longer leaving the picture cropped to shape. So what you have to do if you want to frame around these crop to shape pictures, you go into Picture Border, and you can set both the color and the weight, the thickness of the border. So that's what I did. I set the border to be something like 6 points. In other words, a really thick line. And then what I did, I went to Picture Effects, went into Bevel, and did the 3D effect. And that's how I got this kind of raised picture frame look. And I just butted the pictures together so there wasn't a gap between them. So that's what I did for that particular page layout. And I showed you how to change the pictures out, which is what I did here. I started with 3 copies of the same picture and then changed out 2 of them. So let's look at another useful technique. There are times when you might want to remove the background of a picture, and Word gives you an easy way to do that. So if we look at this picture of my mother in her first communion dress, this picture would be a good candidate for removing the background because there is a very clear color change and outline between the image that I want to keep and the background. So mom in her white veil, white dress, white stockings, it's really easy for the computer to distinguish the image from the background. So all I would do is click on the picture, go to Picture Format, and on the far left here, we have this command that says Remove Background. If I click on that, you notice most of the picture has turned purple. The purple is the area that is going to be removed. Most of it looks fine, except if I went remove background, if I said, yep, this is good, apparently it's going to remove my mother's face and also her hands. So I need to fix that. So this green plus sign says mark the areas you want to keep. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm basically going to scribble over the area that right now is purple that I want to keep. And sometimes it's a bit finicky, but let's color it in, convince them that yes, I really do want all of those bits. Good. So I've now got all of her face, and now I do the same thing with the hands. Sometimes you have to color it. Sometimes the computer's smart enough, if I just click on that area with the pen, it will learn that this is the part that I want to keep. So I look at this and I go, yep, everything looks good. This green check mark that says keep changes, if I click on it, look at that. It has removed the background. And the nice thing is, this image now has a transparent background, which means I could layer it on top of something else. So that's why I showed this on a blue background, to show you that the only part of the image that is colored, if you will, is my mother in her white dress. Everything else in the background has been removed. It's basically transparent. Now, the picture of my father was a lot more difficult to remove the background. And let's just make it a little bit larger so it's easier to see. As you can probably see, with all of the kind of mottled background and shading, the computer has a much more difficult time determining what is shading in the background, what is just, my father's sweater. So I'll just show you what happened when I tried to get Word to remove the background automatically. Can you see that it did a good job of a lot of his sweater and most of his legs? But if I was to just say, yep, that looks good, sadly, there's a large part of my father's head that did not come through, and it kept a part of the background. So for this picture, I had to do a lot more manual fixing. So I went in and said, I have to remove some more stuff. So I clicked this red mark areas to remove, and I'm coloring in, trying not to get too close to the sweater, because I really do want to keep the sweater, and then go through all of this, color it in. Okay, that's looking better. But now I've got to say we have to keep Dad's shoe. And I'll have to fine tune this a bit. But see, now it's tried to keep the chair. So it's a little bit of that back and forth of how much is it going to let me keep? How much is it going to try to take away? So it's a little bit trial and error, but I was able to stick with it, and I ended up with what you see on the right. So I was able to do a pretty good job of removing the background. So apparently I now have my dad sitting down, floating in midair. And you might be thinking, where would you ever use this feature? So let me show you both some of the practical and some of the kind of fun things that you can do with it. So just picture if you were writing your book And you set up your chapter heading to be this lovely blue bar going across the page and it said Chapter 1, Dad's Adventures. And I took this little image of Dad, copy and pasted it in, and just positioned him sitting on top of the blue bar. I think that looks kind of nice. I could create a whole fun calendar for family or friends or layout titled Things Dad Never Did. Well, my dad never rode a horse. According to the picture, he just looks lovely sitting on top of that horse. Dad never rode a camel. So here's a picture of the camel, and all I did was position Dad on top. So I think I could have a lot of fun creating some interesting effects. Where I've also used the remove background is I may have a really nice picture of my mother or my father when they are young that I want to use in a pedigree chart or a diagram. But I really don't want to see the living room furniture or the bushes in the backyard. I just want to see their body, their head, do a head and shoulders shot. So this is where that remove background can really come in handy. Now, there are a few other things you can do with pictures. You can rotate them. So for instance, I now created a photograph of Dad lying down on the back of the camel. Here's how I did it. I moved the picture of Dad into place. This little circle is your rotate handle. You can rotate any shape or picture. And I can either rotate it by clicking on that handle, holding the left mouse button down, and just moving the mouse around. Or I could click on the picture, go to Picture Format, and on the right here are my rotate options. So I can rotate it 90 degrees. I could do left. I could rotate it vertically, horizontally, or I can actually type in the degrees. Or as I said, I tend to just drag the handle so I can position it exactly. I can also rotate the picture. So you've got all kinds of options that, depending on what you want to do, that can come in handy. Now, the last thing I'm going to show you is how to layer and group your shapes and your pictures. So let's look first at the concept of layering. So what I have here is a picture of a camel with the background removed, picture of my dad with the background removed, and a shape. So all I did here to create the shape, I went to Insert, Shapes, and I chose this cube shape and just drew it on the screen. And then I put some lettering on it. So if I want to use these pictures and these shapes to create a scene, I can do things like, if I move Dad, you notice it looks like he's in front of the camel. If I now move this shape, oh, it's in front of both of them. So whenever you're dealing with shapes, there is the concept of layers. Right now, I have 3 images stacked on top of each other, but that's not really the order I want. Maybe I want this blue cube to be behind the camel. So what I do is I've got the cube selected. I go up where it says shape format, and in this section here, this is all what they call the arrange functions. You see these bring forward and send backward commands. That will let me switch that shape to a different layer. So if I send it backward, it's going to send it back one level. So now it's behind Dad, but it's still in front of the camel. If I was to send that shape back again, now it's at the very back. It's behind the camel. So if I click on that shape, let's just move that one out. I'll shift it out a bit. So you can see the cube is now behind the camel. What I really want to do is I want to sit my dad on top of that cube. There. So now I have Dad sitting on the cube and the camel in front of the cube as well. If I wanted to, I could send that camel right to the back. So I click on picture format, and I'm going to send him right to the back. There we go. He is now behind the cube. So that's how you layer things. It's that send backward and bring forward command. But now that I've got these pieces, let's say I want to change where I put this picture. It's really awkward if I have to copy and paste each of these pieces individually, because right now, nothing moves together. This is one picture. This is another one. This is a third one. I want to keep them all permanently glued together because this is the picture I've decided I like. So what I do is I select the first image. I hold my shift key down on the keyboard and click on the next image, and I'll pick the cube. You notice both images are selected. I keep holding the shift key down. I select my father. So I can now let the shift key up. I have 3 images selected. If I go to shape format or picture format, it doesn't matter. Both will bring up this same arrange window. I am going to go to this option called group. And I'm going to click on group. And what it says is this will join the objects together so they can be moved and formatted as if they are one. So watch what happens when I click group. Do you notice now if I want to move this, I can move everything all at once, which is really handy if I decide I want to cut that and paste it somewhere else in the document. A question came up in discussion today after the presentation on how to precisely line up shapes in Word. And there's a few different ways to do that. So what I've done is created 3 different boxes, all the same size. And let's say you were trying to create a pedigree chart and you wanted to line these boxes up from left to right. One way to do it would be using Word's built-in alignment guides. And I'll show you how those work. You click on one of the shapes, go to shape format, go to the align option, and make sure use alignment guides is turned on. I'm going to line everything up to the margins. So what will happen if I now move these shapes around? You notice I've got my ruler at the top, and those little white hourglass shapes and squares, let me just show you here. These are showing the left and right margins on my page. So as I move this shape close to the margin with my mouse, watch what happens. Let's just go here. A green line appears the minute the left edge of that box is lined up with the left margin. Similarly, the line appears when I'm lined up with the right edge. Now, I probably want all these lined up in a row. But let's say first, I'm lining them up vertically. I would line them up against that margin. I could then group them and move them as a unit with my arrow keys. If I'm lining up horizontally, I'm going to move them up until I hit the green line that runs from left to right across the top. And what I can do now is I could move these as a unit using my arrow keys to wherever I wanted to position them on the page. And I could shift these to the right, to the left, and I know now that this shape is lined up right in the middle. The problem with just using the alignment keys, it's still hard to tell whether the spacing between each shape, especially if you don't want the blue shape and the yellow shape glued to the margins, it's hard to tell whether I've got the exact spacing between each shape. So what I tend to use instead of the margins is I tend to use the grid settings, and I'll show you how those work. So I would click on one of the shapes, go to shape format, go back into this align function, and I would, instead of using alignment guides, I would turn those off and I would view the grid lines. And it looks like my screen now has graph paper on the page. And I can also change the setting of that grid. So I have mine set up to be a 1/4 inch for the horizontal spacing and 1/4 inch for vertical spacing. I've got this snap objects to other objects turned on, and I've got an option down at the bottom, snap objects to grid when the grid lines are not displayed. That's handy because if I turn that on, instead of being able to move the shapes a teeny bit at a time, they're going to jump based on the size of those grid squares. I'll leave that off for the moment, but what I'm going to do is leave these settings the way they are. I'm going to click OK. And watch what happens when I move this red box. Do you see that it's jumping to match up to these grid lines, the boxes? So now it makes it really easy to determine that everything is lined up because it wants to line itself up to one of the lines on the graph paper. And I can actually count the squares to make sure that my spacing between my shapes is identical. So that's an easy way to make sure your shapes are positioned the way you want them. I can drag them, and again, they kind of snap into place. I can have them lined up underneath each other. I can even count over and say, well, I'm going to line them up so the end of the blue shape is just one square off of the red. So I'll just put the yellow one in the same position. This kind of alignment is a lot harder to do without using a grid because you can't see how far away you are from everything. So this is generally how I like to line my shapes up. Something else I have done, particularly if I don't have a product that has this snap to grid feature, I'll show you what I do. So for now, let me go back and go into shape format. I will turn off the snap to grid so I can show you what I would do if the product I was using did not have that feature. And let me just say, I will use the alignment lines instead. So I'm going to use the alignment guides. So you notice now I can move this shape using my arrow keys. It's not jumping. I can move it in teeny tiny amounts. It's not automatically lining up with that grid. So what I would do in this situation is I could draw myself a guideline. So I could draw a line. The challenge is drawing a line, it's really easy to be just a little bit crooked. But assuming I had drawn the line straight, I would format it. I would make the line heavier, and the easiest way to do that, go into shape format. I could go shape outline, weight, make it nice and thick so I can see it. And if I try to line this up, I soon discover I didn't draw that line straight. So this is what I do instead to avoid that problem of what if I drew the line crooked. I instead would draw a rectangle because I know that's going to come out perfectly straight on my screen. And I would then nudge with my arrow keys, nudge that shape into position exactly where I want it. And I would just fine tune it until it was the exact alignment. I hope you enjoyed this week's video on cropping to shape, removing picture backgrounds, rotating, layering, and grouping images. Have fun taking your pictures to the next level. Thanks for watching.